Olá e bem-vindos de volta ao meu canal do YouTube. Eu tenho estado a aprender português nos últimos 7 meses. Passaram 4 meses desde que gravei a minha última atualização, que podem ver aqui. Sinto que tenho feito muito progresso nos últimos 4 meses, desde o meu último vídeo. Primeiro, não estou completamente fluente, mas sinto que posso ter conversas básicas e consigo compreender aproximadamente 70% de alguns podcasts. Consigo falar por mensagens com pessoas sem utilizar o Google Tradutor e consigo ter conversas fluídas com a minha professora de português. Mas eu sei que ainda tenho um longo caminho de percorrer. Os meus métodos para aprender têm muito mudado nos últimos 2 meses. Neste vídeo, gostaria de partilhar como tem sido o meu progresso e os métodos que utilizei para chegar até aqui. Um grande obrigado a Joana por ser uma fantástica professora de português e por verificar o meu português para este vídeo. Vamos comparar as minhas capacidades de conversa antes e agora. Eu aprendo português.
Provei chocolate.
Eu entendo um pouco. Desculpa.
Como foi a tua semana?
A minha semana foi bom, obrigado. E tu? Ainda tenho uma semana férias.
Oh, ainda estás de férias?
Sim. Próxima semana voltar para trabalho. Comecei a trabalhar como voluntário. Olá, como estás?
Estás-me a ouvir bem?
Sim. E tu?
Ok, boa. Também.
Boa. Eu vivo em Portugal durante 7 meses.
7 meses? Uau!
Sim, no Porto.
Quando é que começaste a aprender português?
Sim. Eu começo a aprender português há 7 meses.
Uau!
Sim.
Então está mesmo bom.
Obrigado. Para que este vídeo não demore muito tempo, vou mudar de volta para inglês durante o resto do vídeo. So 7 months ago, I couldn't even speak any Portuguese. I knew probably hello and thank you. Olá, obrigado. And that's about it. And now for the most part, I can actually get around and have basic conversations. It's like a level of fluency I couldn't even imagine just 4 months ago. So I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty impressed. And I'm going to share with you today the methods I used to get here. So my method for learning has actually changed a lot, and I think it's made a massive change to my rate of progress. In the first 3 months of my learning, my language learning was focused primarily on using 3 apps: Anki, Italki, and an app called Practice Portuguese. All of these are really good apps, and I'd highly recommend them. So what I would do back then, and I think was a really good way to start learning the language, was to learn new grammar lessons on Practice Portuguese, and then practice them with my teacher on Italki, having one-on-one conversations. And then I would load all the new phrases and sentences that I learned in those lessons into Anki, and then practice flashcards with them. And I think it was really efficient. But eventually I got to a point where I built up all of these phrases and sentences in my head, and I knew basically maybe about 1,000 words, but I was having trouble really putting them into sentences and using them in everyday conversations. So about 2 or 3 months ago, based on some language learning research I did, I decided to switch it up totally. So I'm going to share with you today what I did, what I changed, and how it totally changed up my rate of progress. So this new method is focused on maximizing 2 things: input and output. Just to run through it quickly, input is about consuming content from all different types of sources: TV shows, movies, music, podcasts, YouTube videos, books, you name it. And output is focused on producing speech, because the neural pathways in your brain required to produce speech and the muscle memory required in your mouth and vocal cords are very different from the ones you need to read and to listen. So firstly, input. I was really heavy on using flashcards before in the first few months of my study. But now, instead of using flashcards, I'm purely learning based on input-based methods. So what does that mean? It just means watching and listening to as much content in Portuguese as I can. And this is based on the idea of comprehensible input by Stephen Krashen. The idea behind it is that you should aim to get as much comprehensible input in your target language as possible in order to learn it. As you listen and watch it, you just kind of absorb it into your brain, which is kind of like the natural way that we learn our native language. So the app that's helped me the most with this is one called Link. So they've got content from all different types of sources around the internet in all these different languages. And what I find really good is that they actually have a library of European Portuguese. So if you've been studying European Portuguese, you'll probably understand that the challenge is that most of the content around is in Brazilian Portuguese, which is quite different. So here they've actually got it sectioned into European and Brazilian Portuguese, which makes learning a lot easier. And it's got transcripts of the content alongside the content that you can watch and listen to, and you can pick out individual words and define them and define entire phrases so that you can understand what's going on. So essentially, it takes care of both the input and the comprehensible side. So using the Link app, I watched all of their 60 mini stories, which are really cool. They build up from basic level all the way to an intermediate, basic advanced level. And I've listened to all of them at least like 5 times now. I also used it to watch a lot of videos from Portuguese with Leo and Mia Esmerish. Both are really, really good channels for European Portuguese learners. So shout out to them. You guys are doing an awesome job. If you're watching this video, thank you so much for your work. And they've got subtitles in both English and Portuguese, which makes it really, really good for learning. So the second, and what I believe the most important part of this method, is focusing on output. So this is using a method from the channel Language Lords, but it basically involves telling stories about your own life over and over again, and translating words that you don't know, and building upon this story. So I love the idea behind this because it's the best way, I think, to get the most important kind of practice in, which is speaking. And it's also the hardest one to really get in real life as well. Because if you're a basic speaker, it's hard to really have a conversation in your target language with somebody. So I had a few weeks off between Christmas and New Year's recently. And during this time, I decided to go pretty hard on studying Portuguese. And I spent about 2 to 3 hours using this method and studying every single day. I told a mix of stories from my own life and also summarized some videos from Portuguese with Leo as well. And I think it made a lot of progress, especially in the fluidity of my sentences and my conversation skills. But I have no idea how that guy on Language Lords manages to do it for 8 hours a day. I felt like my brain was running a marathon. He's an absolute machine. And I wanted to spend some time actually relaxing and having a bit of time off because it was a holiday period. So 2 to 3 hours a day for me was plenty. And the other way of practicing my speaking was, of course, to try and speak to some real people. So I jumped on an app called HelloTalk, which allows you to have language exchanges with people from over the internet. And at first, it was really hard. Não muito entendo. But it got easier. So as a bonus method, I also had a Google Sheet that I used to practice my verb conjugations almost every single day. And this is another idea I got from Language Lords. So thank you. And I'll leave a link to this sheet down below in case you'd like to use it as well. I'll be covering in another video what I did in those 3 weeks of intense study to go from beginner to an intermediate level of Portuguese. So if you're interested in seeing that video, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when that video comes out. During this time, I also had my regular twice-a-week lessons with my teacher, Joana, on Italki, which was really, really useful to clear up any questions I had about grammar or anything else about the language. Now, do I think it would have been faster if I had started with this method from the beginning instead of only 4 months, 5 months in? Maybe, but Portuguese is the first European language I'm learning, apart from English, but that doesn't count because it's my native language, of course. There was a lot I had to get used to. I didn't even know what a verb conjugation even was when I started. So I think the lessons for grammar that were on Practice Portuguese were really useful and were a good way for me to get introduced to the language. And especially given my ability to commit only about 30 minutes or so a day, I think it was a really good method to start with. If you have more time in your day, I'd highly recommend doing this input-output method from as early as possible. And of course, to practice speaking to real people as early as you can too. So pay for those one-on-one lessons if you can afford it, because it's definitely worth it. So from here, I'm gonna try and continue using this speaking method as much as I can and listening to Portuguese using the Link app whenever I'm commuting or doing chores, or basically just have some time to listen to things during the day. But for my active 30 to 60 minutes or so of studying per day, I'm gonna try and write more stories and speak as much as I can, even if it's just by myself. If you've got some tips that I've missed here that you'd love to share, I'd love to hear them, so comment down below. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope some of these tips can help you on your language learning journey, especially if you're learning European Portuguese, but I think this can be applied to pretty much any language. So, best of luck. Espero que tenham gostado neste vídeo. Obrigado por virem. Tchau!